And I've kind of been in that business, as well as been a professor at community college around Albany, New York, but in the teaching profession about 20 years overall. And right now, I'm kind of been heavily focused on preparing curriculum for the digital SAT exam, which has been on a lot of people's minds. So I've been like super engrossed in that and taking digital SATs. Um, so I threw on the board here, if you don't have to jot it down, because we will email the group after, so you'll have my contact info that way. But this is me, my cell, my email, and I'll be showing you some kind of key things on my website. And that's about it on my end, and I'll give it back to Jen.
Thank you, Jim. Awesome. And I'll just quickly mention too that Jim and I both went to Cornell, so we weren't there at the same time, but we are alumni friends, right? So that's a lot of fun. And my name is Jennifer. I used to live in Albany, but I just recently, in the last couple of weeks, moved to Portland, Oregon. So I am now on Pacific time. I'm an independent educational consultant. I help students like anywhere from middle school, high school to get ready to apply for middle boarding school or for college admissions. And I have students from all over the world, all over the US, and I've been doing this for more than 10 years now. It's a lot of fun, work with a lot of students. So today we're going to be diving into just like the whole kind of ball of wax, if you will, of like, do I take a test? Do I not take a test? Is a test optional, not optional? Test blind? Should I, if I were going to take a test, how do I take it? Which test do I take? That's going to be more Jim, right? He's the expert on the testing side. I'm going to give you kind of a bit more background just on like a bigger picture of testing from a college admission side. So I'm going to go ahead and share some slides with you, just kind of talk about kind of the background, and then and I'll hand it over to Jim and talk about kind of the specifics. So we'll have maybe like a brief Q&A right after I speak, and then we'll have more time for question and answer afterwards as well. But at any point, if you have any questions, feel free to just pop your questions in the chat, and then we'll be sure to get to them as well. So any burning issues right now? If not, then I'm gonna share my screen. Okay, all right. Okay. Yes, okay. So are we good? Can you guys all see my screen? Yes?
Yep, got it.
Okay, good. Okay, great. Oh, new person coming in. Okay. All right, let's see. So, okay, like I said, my contact information is down there as well, collegecoachjen.com, and you can write down my number, email, I think you already have, and then WeChat as well. So let's see if I can get to the next slide. Next slide. Okay, so first question. Is SAT and ACT still important? Because right after COVID, a lot of schools started going test optional, and that was partly because the issues with COVID and having lots of people, in one room. As we're coming out of the pandemic, I personally still believe, and I think a lot of experts do agree, that testing is still important. Many colleges, universities still consider it to be a reliable measurement of academics, whether it's math, English, decision making, all these things. And then when colleges, if you keep in mind that they're admitting people, they're admitting students, their goal is for you to succeed. Their goal is for like whoever they admit into their college to be able to graduate, right? And the statistics that they've been looking at is that people who have higher scores tend to graduate or tend to more likely graduate. So that's kind of one statistics there. Of course, there are colleges that do not even consider testing, which we call test blind, and we'll get to that later. But if you are considering colleges that either require the SAT or ACT, or if it's optional, I will still think that it's important to at least think about it, at least try it. Okay, so that is my answer to you. Of course, there can be debates, but that is just my personal opinion, and I would say like most of the professional consultants and counselors are stating this at this moment in time. So, and then here is just a little tidbit too that the College Board released in 2023. About 1.9 million students took the SAT, and that's up from 1.7 in 2022. So more and more students are taking the SAT. The ACT is a little different. There's actually fewer people taking the ACT. It's a little bit like, I think more people are taking SAT now and less are taking ACT. I don't know if you're seeing that too, Jim, but just like nationally, the statistics seem to be that there are more people taking the SATs, not less, because you kind of would think that if colleges are going all test optional, there'll be fewer people taking the SAT, but there's actually more people taking the SAT. But it's more like a competition thing between SAT and ACT. I think ACT has kind of been declining.
Well,
Mm.
I'll also, I know it is a regional thing too. I
True.
know
Yep.
that certain states do favor ACT, and I don't know if that's because of like marketing or what the school districts happen to say. One thing I'll add is just a pre-pandemic number. So 2019, 2.2 million students took the SAT. So it dropped drastically during the pandemic. And then essentially what I'm seeing, as you're showing here, is it kind of bounced back to at least, about 90% of its high we're kind of back to.
Yeah, so I think the trend sounds like, the pandemic, definitely there was a dip, but it's not like continually going down. As some people may say, oh, all the tests are going to be optional now, so I don't think that's the case. I think more people are starting to take it, more colleges are starting to require tests, like some of the ones that went optional now has come back and said now we require it. So we'll kind of have to wait and see, right? Like over the longer term, what that will happen. But I would say for students who are graduating in the next, like 2 years or so, like it's still a good idea to consider your testing options for sure. Okay. So then the question is, for those test optional schools, is the submitting a score give you an advantage, right? So here's just a few snapshots. Of course, we don't have all the universities here, but some of the schools, right? UPenn, you have 62% of students submitted the scores, and then the ones who did submit had a 94% advantage. Georgia Tech, similar story around all of these schools. Just a note here, Georgia Tech, they at this point, like when this statistic was there, it was test optional, but now they are requiring the scores. And then same thing for University of Georgia. The testers had a 50% better chance of being admitted compared to people who didn't submit their scores. And then now University of Georgia is requiring scores again. So, here's just some trends. So I would say, if you have a good score, it's probably a good idea to submit it. And then we'll kind of go into a little bit more detail on that as well. Okay. Now, so then the question is SAT, ACT worthwhile taking? Is it worth all the trouble? Do I want to spend all the time, right? To study for it, take it? And the kind of the general answer is that if it's doable for you without any super major difficulties, then and you think you can get a good score, then the answer is yes, right? If there's huge difficulties or if there's crazy like issues that you just can't take the test for whatever reason, then you can still apply to test optional schools and that's fine. But if you're just like, oh, I'd rather go, on vacation or like if I'd rather, watch more TV or something, that's probably not the best reason, right? So if you have the time, you don't have huge hurdles to overcome, and then it's probably a good idea just to at least take it. And if you don't have a good score, you don't have to submit them, right? But it's a good idea to kind of see where you are. And Jim, you might have an opinion on this too, but like I always recommend for my students to take the test at least twice, but probably not more than 3 times. If if you took it 3 times already, most likely you're not going to get a higher score on the fourth time. So I'm recommending 2 times at least, because sometimes you just have like an off day. Maybe the second time you take it, it's a lot better, and sometimes the first time you take it, it might be nervous, whatever. You just don't know, where the things are to click, like that kind of thing. So sometimes taking the second time, I think is worthwhile. And then if you really want to do it again, okay, do it a third time. But for me, like I'm recommending my students to do it at least twice, maybe 3 times, but definitely not more than 3 times. What do you think about that, Jim?
Yeah, I'm going to actually address that later as well. Yeah, I can say from experience, because right now teaching classes and tutoring for the SAT is essentially the main thing I'm doing. I'm always asking students like, yeah, let me know what you scored. And I found that definitely a large proportion of my students get a higher score on their second try than on their first try. And then that proportion goes down, a large chunk when you're talking about taking it a third time. I do get some improvement the third time. And then, Jen, certainly, like for me, students that go beyond 3 tries, just statistically, a small percentage, I'm talking about, kind of like 1 out of every 10 students I see gets a significantly higher score on a fourth try than they already have attained. So yeah, I see that big drop off, statistically speaking, after 3 attempts. And I also just think it's healthier to focus on other things. Once you've taken it 3 times, I feel like you've given the process your all at that point, and now it's time to invest your energy into other aspects of the application process.
Absolutely. It is just like it's not worth, like spending the extra time, extra energy to really do that. So that's kind of the answer. I definitely think it's worthwhile taking a couple of times, whichever test you choose. And then we'll kind of talk about just these are some examples here of schools that are test required, test optional, and test blind. So we'll just kind of talk about obviously, test required is that you have to have either the SAT or the ACT. And I believe all these schools are like either or. None of them are saying you have to take SAT or you have to take ACT. So you can choose whether it's SAT or ACT. And then the test optional is that basically if you submit a score, they will consider it. If you don't submit a score, technically they don't count it against you. But as you've seen in the previous slide, is that people who do submit scores tend to have a higher chance in most of these schools. So even though it is test optional, is a little bit deceiving and not like I don't think they're being intentionally deceiving. It's just that they're trying to like not make it so hard for students, right? Like they're trying to not discourage students who really can't take a test to not apply. But I think like kind of going back to what we were saying before, if you're able to take a test and you get a good score, it's probably a good idea to submit it because you do see an advantage in the admissions statistics for people who submit their scores. And that test blind is kind of like the totally other spectrum, is that they do not want to see your score. They do not want you to send a score. If you insist and send a score, they will just throw it away and not even look at it. Okay. So that is all the UCs, right? All the University of California ones, so Berkeley, UCLA, all the Riverside, Irvine, all of those. Caltech, WPI, all of these schools here. A lot of them really on the West Coast. I think there was like some kind of lawsuit. I'm not exactly sure why, but basically, they just do not want to see any kind of test. So if you're sure that all you're going to apply are these schools that are completely test blind, then I say, don't even try to take the test. It's fine. But if you're considering any schools that are test optional or of course test required, then it's still a good idea to invest the time and see what you can do on the test. So, all right. So then the question becomes, so now you have a score, right? Maybe you have two scores. Do I submit it or not submit it, right? And this is, of course, only applicable to the test optional schools, because if the required schools, you have to submit, so there's no question. The test blind ones, they don't want to see it, so definitely don't submit because they don't care. But for the test optional schools, if you had a score that's like, oh, you think it's pretty good, but you're not sure if it's gonna hurt you, and you're not sure if you want to submit, then it really does depend. And here, I will give you an example of what you can find online. For basically every college or university have what's called a common data set. This is the data that they are obligated to publish on the people who they admit. So it's a big PDF, like 20 something pages. All you have to do is Google the school's name and the two words common data set, and usually it pops up. They have it for every school year. So make sure you're looking at something that's more recent. So for right now, you would want to look at the 2022-2023 school years, because that is the latest one that has happened. If we were talking about next year, right, in the fall, sometime in June, July, the common data set will come out for the 23-24 school year's application data. So I will show you an example of what this looks like. So there are many different sections, actually, so I'll just go back for 1 second. There's many different sections. So you want to be looking at section C of that document, just to help you navigate a little bit. And of course, if you don't want to dig into all this, you can, of course, work with a college consultant or a college counselor who can help you navigate with all of these, so you don't have to like look at every school. That's what I do. That's what I help our students. But you can certainly do this yourself if you have the time as well. So here's an example. So we're looking at right now Tufts University, which is in Boston. And like I said, you can find this for every college, right? They basically have to disclose it. So any college you're looking at, you can find this online, and then just make sure you're looking for the section C of the common data set. So you can see here for the Tufts class of 2022-2023 that they admitted, their freshman class, 37% of them submitted SAT scores, and then 19% of them submitted ACT scores. You can also see what was their scores like, right? The middle 50 percentile, so half of their class was at 1500, and then the upper 75 percentile is at 1540, the lower 25 percentile is at 1460. So you can see based on these numbers that if you have something like in the 1500s, right, then I would say definitely submit that score, because that score is right kind of in that range of their admitted students, right? If you had a score that's like in 1300s, it's like way below what they're looking for, that score probably wouldn't help you, right? That score probably would not really help you. So if you got that score, and it might be great for a different college who have a different common data set, but I would shoot for something that's at least like in that 25 to 50th percentile. If you got like a 1480, I would say definitely submit it. If you got like a 1400, maybe it's a little bit like on the edge, and it's not impossible. So keep in mind that 25 percentile means that there's 25% of the people they admitted are under this number, right? And then on the bottom here, you can also see by reading and by math, writing and math, and then you can also see the ACT scores, right? Let's see, and then there's the score range, so you can see that 80%, 86% scored between 700 to 800 on the reading, and then 92% scored between 700 to 800. So this is just really an example of like one college's common data set. You can pull this for any college, and then based on each college, you can then take that like as an educated guess as to whether you can submit that score. So we can certainly talk more about this later, and if you have more questions. But I do want to hand it over to Jim because he has a lot more details that he wants to share as well. Let me stop my share. Any burning questions real quick? Maybe we take one burning question or two. If you guys have anything. Hello. Sorry, that's my son.
I had one question. It's probably something we can Google, but I was curious if you had any idea, like, of the rough percentage of schools that are test required versus test optional versus test blind, because we saw examples, but I don't know.
Yeah, the examples I put on there is not to scale in terms of the numbers. I will say like a huge percent is actually test optional.
Okay.
So it's probably
'Cause I
like
was,
close to like 80% or
that's what
more
I was
that's test
thinking.
optional. Yeah. And then the tests required are really just those ones that are there. So
Okay.
MIT, it's a short list. It's maybe like 10 or less schools that are test required. And then the test blind ones are also not that many. I want to say like maybe 20. And it's basically all the schools that are in California and a couple in Washington on the West Coast. So that's also not a huge number, but most of them are test optional. So,
Oh,
and I think that kind of goes to the point where is that, most likely, because usually the students, like my students, um, applying to like 12, 15 schools, like that's kind of the normal range, maybe 8, 10, 12, 15 schools, maybe more. There's a high chance that you will have some schools that you're applying to that are test optional,
yeah,
most likely.
the impression I got, and I wanted to see if you kind of.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. Yeah. All right. Well, I hand it over to you, Jim.
Okay. All right. So, and thank you so much for the common data set. I've always kind of Googled something like similar to that, but like, and got rough answers from Google, but I even kind of jotted it down because I want to put it in my phone later, because I think that's a huge help in that decision-making process. So, all right. So here's what I'm going to end up doing. So I am going to talk about, like, so let's assume that you are planning on taking the SAT or ACT. I'll quickly talk about deciding, how do you decide which to go after. I'll do a quick comparison of these exams so you get an idea of both. I'll talk about kind of best how to plan your test dates, which includes how many times should I take it. And then just a little bit about like the best ways to prepare for this, whether on your own or with a tutor. And then again, like Jen and I will do one more space at the end for questions here. So, so the first thing I'm going to do is I will share. I'm actually sharing. Oh, hang on one second. Yes. Yes. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to, what I'm sharing actually is on my website, which you see at the top of the screen. And it's under diagnostics and planning. So the things I'm going to show you, you can go to prowessprep.com, click diagnostics and planning, and you'll be able to kind of see everything I'm showing you. So how to decide whether to take the SAT or ACT. And I think that comes down to taking a diagnostic exam of both and see how you end up doing. Now, for the most part, schools, at least in New York State, will offer a PSAT exam. So that can be your diagnostic for the SAT. I bet a lot of, your sons and daughters out there have PSAT scores. So I would say that's good enough. That's your baseline score. You don't have to take an SAT diagnostic. Now, if you want to take an SAT diagnostic because your school did not offer the PSAT, Remember that the SAT is a digital exam now, so it's not, no one can send you a paper test to take, but there is an app to download now. So if you want to take a digital SAT diagnostic, then you download the app Blue Book, and right on my site, there's a link to be able to download it. Or, again, you can text or email me and I can send you the link, or just Google download Blue Book. Once it's downloaded, it'll ask for a College Board username and password. So that's something if you don't have one, you can set up an account. And then there'll be a tab to click full length practice. And you can always text me for more assistance on this, but I'll show you what it looks like. So I think I had this open. So I do have Blue Book. And when you enter your College Board username and password, it'll let you in, and the screen will look like this. You'll click full length practice. It'll ask for a test type. I would say just click SAT, SAT practice test 1, and then that's it. Like, boom, you're in. Now, again, good chance you'll hit a snag or forget how to do this. You'll have my contact information. Just get in touch. But I'll just quickly show you, like as soon as you do that, boom, the test has started. So I figure, hey, while I'm in here, I'll show you the navigation of it. So this is a reading writing section. They're starting with a sentence completion question. You'll fill in, we won't go through the questions, but I'll just kind of show you navigating the test. I can answer a question, I can click next, and I'm into the next question. Now I can click to the next question and not answer questions, and I can go back. If it's a question I've already answered, I can go back and change my answer. If I want to jump to a different part of the section, I can jump to question 17. I can go back to question 2. You can mark questions on a digital test. And if I mark questions 2 and 3, what that does is then when I click my kind of menu, it'll show up that these were marked. That means maybe at the end of the section before I submit, any marked question just means I want to go back and check this out for some reason, okay? So that's kind of like, there are, not everybody's comfortable with a digital test, but there are navigation advantages, things like being able to mark a question. And the reading writing section will involve, different question types. When you're done with the sentence completions, they go on to reading comprehension passages. The passages are really short, a paragraph each, and there's 1 question per paragraph. Okay, so this is just giving you, here's another SAT reading question. This one involves data. So the reading is numerous questions, but very short passages. Let me see. I'm just going to kind of navigate ahead. You'll eventually get to grammar questions within this section as well. And that's just a little bit about the navigation. Now, if I go to the very end here, it'll at the very end of the section will say check your work. This is where I can decide, should I go back, check out any questions if I have time left, and if not, I'm just going to click next. The module is over, and I'm on to the next. Well, they just call it a module, but it's just a section, and I'm on to the next section. In this essay, in an SAT, the first 2 sections are reading, writing. And then you'll see if I click past section 2, it'll give me a break. I don't have to take that break. I can resume testing. And I can move along into the math. And now I'm in the math portion of the test. There's 2 sections of the math. And then when I'm done with both math sections, As a matter of fact, here, I'll just show you real quickly. When I am done with both math sections, so just bear with me as I just go to the very end of the second math section, it will immediately and automatically grade the exam. And that's how you could get an SAT diagnostic. View your score. It might redirect me now. I don't know if it's going to. No, it's going to make me sign into College Board, but you would be able to go into your College Board account and then get your score. So let me, I know it just kind of messed up my screen share. So let me jump out of that. Oh, now I'm back. Oh, I didn't practice that. So let me jump out of that. And I'm going to add oh, sorry, bear with me. I'm just going to reopen my website. And I'll screen share in just a second.
Jen, while you're doing that, there's a question in the chat. I'll just go ahead and ask it out loud. So the question is the new digital SAT version shorter than the regular or the previous SAT or the older version?
Yeah, quick answer is yes. And I will actually be addressing that on the third bullet point in more detail. But yes, it's about 1 hour shorter. So if you were to take an SAT diagnostic, there's the drill. Now, an ACT diagnostic, that's actually a simpler process. Again, it is on my site. You click ACT diagnostic, and here it is. It's a paper test. You print it out. You fill out the bubble sheet. You can self-grade it, but I tell people you can take a photo of the bubble sheet, text it to me. I'll input it in a program and I will send you a grade. So I'll be fair to ACT and I'll just quickly run through an ACT exam. Now on a paper test, same as a digital test, sure, you can skip questions, you can go ahead, you can move back. You can mark questions, but you would just like put a slash next to the question if you want to go back to it. It's just going to be more of an analog process. An ACT, you notice the SAT kind of reading and writing was all mixed up into one section. On an ACT, they're going to test writing first. By writing, I mean grammar. So sorry, this is a little bit fuzzy, just the way it came out, but oh, there we go. But you're going to see all of the questions in this section are going to test your, just going to be having you mainly fill in alternatives of grammar and vocabulary, okay? And the entire section is more of a writing grammar-based focus. On the reading section of the ACT, I actually need to jump to section 3 for that. You're going to see a reading comprehension passage. You're going to notice rather than short, choppy, quick passages with one question per passage, this is going to be a larger passage with 10 questions. And they do that 4 times on the ACT exam. So if you're saying like, what's the biggest difference? I'd say the biggest difference is the reading comprehension. Do you want to do short passages, but more of them? Or do you prefer to sit down and read a longer passage and answer several questions about that one passage? These might be questions you can't answer until you get a feel for both tests. But the reading and the writing is very much connected on the SAT and all intertwined within itself, and it's more separated on the ACT. An ACT math section is not that much different from an SAT math section. It's a series of multiple choice questions. You can use your calculator on the ACT. You can use your calculator on the SAT. It's just about it being on paper format rather than digital. If you're taking a digital SAT, though, you still get scrap paper to work on. So here's kind of, but we're looking at an ACT math. And the ACT, rather than having a second math section, has what they call a science section. The science section is kind of a mixture between reading comprehension and data analysis. So you are reading passages, but these passages involve data, and then they ask you a set of questions about an experimental procedure and about the data that results from it. It's like, I feel like it's almost a mixture between kind of, yeah, I wouldn't say there's a lot of math to the science. I'd say it's a mixture between science, data analysis, and reading comprehension. So if you were to take a practice ACT, that's what it would look like. I do have a quick ACT diagnostic, because if you're exhausted from already taking an SAT diagnostic, but you want an ACT diagnostic score, but you're a little bit low on energy, I have a quicker version that's truncated. It's about half the length. That's my recommendation for if you've decided I want to pursue testing, take a diagnostic exam first to guide you in this decision, SAT versus ACT. Now, I'll summarize this and, kind of in one sheet here. Here's the differences. ACT versus SAT. ACT is going to be a paper exam. SAT is going to be administered on your laptop. Once you download the Blue Book app, you'll have the ability not only to take practice tests, but formal, like real SATs when you go to a testing center. They'll give you a laptop if you don't have one. The question about the duration of the test, the ACT is about 3 hours, and the old SAT was about 3 hours. The digital SAT is about 45 minutes shorter. So that's an attractive point for students, is that, like, yeah, it's just a less arduous day. You noticed when I showed you the exams, the format was a little bit different. The ACT has a reading section, and the ACT has a separate writing section. But on the SAT exam, there's 2 sections, but both sections just combine reading comprehension and grammar. So it's all kind of intertwined. We also see that the ACT exam has 1 math section, but the SAT has 2 math sections. So let's say you're a student that very much struggles in math. That might be a consideration. The ACT is 25% math because it's only 1 section out of 4. The SAT really is 50% math. It's 2 out of 4 sections. Because rather than do a second math section, you'll have that science section I showed you, which is really more data analysis and reading comprehension, but it is not math in a calculation sort of sense. So this is food for thought. Even if you didn't want to take a diagnostic, you might be able to tell what test is more suitable for just my learning and test taking style. Test navigation, as you saw in both tests, you can skip questions and you can go back to previous questions. On an SAT digital test, you have the ability to digitally mark questions. What about scoring? So scoring on the ACT is 1 to 36. Okay, and then each section gets a grade. You get a reading grade 1 to 36, a writing grade 1 to 36, same for math, same for science, and then your composite is based on the average of those 4 scores. The SAT, I find more people, at least in New York, know the SAT. It's the same scoring scale it's basically always been. It's out of 1,600, 800 for reading, writing, and 800 out of 800 for the math. But the scoring is adaptive. So what does that mean that it's an adaptive scoring? So I'm going to direct your attention that this is, asterisks. And at the bottom here, it kind of tells you, how does the test adapt? Now, it doesn't adapt question by question. A test that were to adapt question by question, that would mean if you answer a question wrong, the next question's easier. If you answer a question right, the next question's harder. Doesn't quite work that way. Adaptive scoring means that on the first reading writing section, they'll assess your score. And whatever that score is will determine whether you get a harder section 2 reading writing or an easier section 2 reading writing. And these last 2 bullets help describe that a little more. Basically, if you answer fewer than 50% of reading writing section 1 questions correctly, it'll initiate an easier section 2 reading writing. And then that easier section 2 only allows a final score range up to about 570. Now, if you answer more than 50% of the section 1 questions correctly in reading writing, it'll initiate a harder reading writing section 2. But your final score has the potential to be up to 800. So obviously, goal number 1 is you want to get that section 1 at a point where you're at least answering more than 50% of questions correctly. That digital adaptation is the way that they can make a test shorter, but still accurately assess your ability. So that's the another kind of, the way the test is scored is a bit different. And last thing on this, the wait time. ACT takes about 2 weeks. The SAT can brag that they can send your score, they can reveal your scores within the week. Now, I know like the scoring scales are confusing, so a heads up, once again, on my website, I do have a concordance table. So if you get an SAT score of 1100 and you want to know, well, what does that mean? Well, if you got an SAT score of 1100, but you scored a 25 on your ACT, well, think about that then. If your diagnostic SAT score was 1100, but your diagnostic ACT score was a 25, well, that means forget the SAT, pursue the ACT. You're already starting at a level much higher. That 25 ACT would be equivalent to a 1200 SAT. Clearly, your brain works better for that style of testing. And yeah, I mean, for a lot of students, the issue comes out hazy. You might score an 1100 on the SAT and a 22 on the ACT. They're relatively the same, and I often consult people on other factors they can use to make the decision. I'll pause just in case there's any questions on test format and scoring, but I don't see anything in the chat right now. Okay. All right. So let me actually kind of stop share to show you everybody kind of where we're at here. we kind of took care of deciding SAT versus ACT. How are you going to decide? My top recommendation is do that by way of taking a diagnostic test for both, but you probably already have a PSAT score, meaning you wouldn't have to deal with taking a diagnostic SAT. In that same time, we did do a brief comparison of the exams as well. You got to see a little bit of a digital SAT. You got to see a bit of an ACT. If you want to take a closer look on your own, you can always, shoot me a text or go right to my website and just follow the prompts and go into it yourself. And what's next on the docket here is, yeah, like, all right, how do you plan test dates and how many times should you take it? So again, back into my website here, I'll just have to, let me see if I can. Sorry if I was muted there. On my website here, I do have a test calendar. So you can always jump to my website and here is a calendar of test dates. You can always text me too. I can text you this. But this is all the SAT exams that are going to take place all the way up until, a year from this summer. Same with the ACT. And I want to kind of mention a few things that you should think about. You should consider issues like, when is my prom weekend? A lot of times the May 4th SAT exam is the same weekend as some people have their junior prom, and that may not be a good idea. The other thing about the May exam is if you're taking a lot of APs, you're going to be studying for the APs, which usually take place in early May. Do you want to do that at the same time you're studying for the SAT? So that may be a couple reasons to nix the May exam. And you might say, all right, shoot, I'm going to go for the March exam because I don't want to take the May. If I want to take a second shot at it, I'm skipping the May and I'm doing June. Another thing to consider is varsity sports. If you run track in the spring, but you don't have a winter sport, well, you're going to be studying for the March SAT exam in the winter. That's going to be a good exam to take. You'll be studying in January and February. Now, if you have a winter sport, I don't know if you want to take the March SAT. That winter sport will end in March, and you'll have a couple months in the spring to prepare for the May. So think about big events like prom. Think about AP exams, and think about things like sports and extracurriculars. Essentially, you want the 4 to 8 weeks before the test you're taking to have the least on the plate if possible, because you're going to be adding another big thing. Some people go for a summer date. They just say, all right, I am busy all darn school year. I'm just going to go ahead with a summer SAT, so I have the summer to prepare for it. I know everybody might not be the biggest fan of that either. Summer's also a time to vacation and relax. So again, it's up to you. You can take SATs all the way up to the fall of your senior year, but you'll want to think about when are your application deadlines. If you're applying regular decision, you can take the November SAT of your senior year. If you're applying early decision, the November SAT is probably not going to work. So you've got to look at college application deadlines. Any questions in regards to schedule?
I'll just jump in for a quick second here, Jim. I'm always recommending my students to aim for the September ones as kind of the latest ones, even if they're not doing early decision, because a lot of schools now are also doing early action and they want those scores as well. So I think it's just a good idea not to push it too far. And once you get into October, it gets kind of iffy in terms of like how soon it takes College Board to send the scores. So I would highly recommend like keeping it in September as sort of the latest one. You know, maybe one in spring, one in summer, and then worst comes to worst, you want to do a third one, do a September one. You know, that's kind of my general recommendation. But if
Okay,
you can get
yeah,
it done in spring and summer, like
yeah,
great, you know, get it
yeah.
done by August. That'll be awesome.
Well, I definitely defer to you, and I trust Jen, because this is that my realm is more like getting your score, tutoring, getting your score high. But Jen, you're definitely the planner, and I think a lot of people would agree. So yeah, thank you, definitely for that input. So once again, like I'm planning the test dates carefully. That would lead me into the number of test day attempts, but we basically covered that. The recommendation, Jen and I both agree. I think definitely take at least 2 shots. I see a very large proportion go up in score on their second try, even if they don't prep for the second try. Just being more relaxed. It's no longer your first rodeo. The second swing of the bat is usually more likely to connect than the first swing. Third attempt, you might see some icing on the cake. Beyond that, yeah, for the most part, I don't see much. So I would say jump into the calendar and at least say what's going to be the best 2 dates, factoring in things like prom, AP exams, and sports. All right, so in terms of kind of where we're headed here, planning the test dates, that's done. And now just real quick to conclude this before any last questions, I want to mention a little bit on preparing. Now, of course, like on my site, I do offer classes and I tutor, but let's just say for a moment, you're prepping on your own, and it is like very possible to be highly successful prepping on your own. And here's what I would say to do. First off, stick to one exam. When you take a diagnostic, that the entire issue of taking a diagnostic and seeing which test is better for you, that's the time to be trying both tests. Once you've decided, I think you got to stay the course on one exam. Because if you're alternating back and forth or you're studying for both, I think you're expending tremendous amounts of energy. And I think you're diluting your efforts to the point where you're unlikely to maximize your score on either test. So there are definitely opposing schools of thought on this. I've talked to test prep and college counselors that say take it both as many times as you can. But my school of thought is take a few shots and make them good shots. Use the best materials, which I think, and these are links, Amazon links to these books. The College Board book for SAT and the official ACT study guide are the only sources for authentic tests. I do have other companies that I trust that will that do design good tests. You can ask me about that, but this is where you start. The official books made by the test writers are these, and I think you would want to go for one of those. Next thing, be consistent. You want to build momentum working each week. Now, I don't care if it's a half hour a week or 3 hours a week, but I think you want consistency. So wait, till you're 1 to 2 months prior to the test date. Don't study all year. your GPA is more important than your SAT or ACT score. So I think you want to focus on school, reserve test prep for the 1 to 2 months prior to test day, and then commit. Prep each week, whether it's a little or a lot, rather than scatter prep throughout the year here and there. You're not going to build momentum that way. I advocate working in small chunks and large chunks. So for example, here, one ACT reading passage, not a whole section. I mean, just a passage is 9 minutes. That if you struggled in ACT reading, think about, like, you could do one passage per day. It's a 9-minute exercise, and it makes practice doable and not scary. Like, sometimes the hardest thing is starting. But if you're all right, I'm gonna do a passage every day. One reading passage, I'm gonna do it every other day. 9 minutes, and it's like, okay, I'm gonna get a little bit better each time at it. That's a very nice way to do practice. But we can't underestimate the importance of building endurance. So once in a while, suck it up, sit down, and say, I'm going to do a full-time test. I'm going to plan this, whatever Sunday, 2 weeks before a game day, I'm going to do a dress rehearsal. I'm going to take a full-time test. The importance of that is just perfecting the overall process and being ready for, like, how the real test feels. And more important than anything else, don't just plow through a dozen tests. Take a test, review it. Your score is actually not going to advance that much if you're not refining your process by reviewing the mistakes. So most books have an explanation section. You don't have to review every single problem. You can let certain things go. You don't want it to be arduous, but at least try to review the explanations of accessible problems. If it's appropriate, redo certain problems, especially like a math problem. And then, like, just periodically reflect back on all past problems. So if you've taken 3 past practice tests, just like every once in a while, do a run through of all 3 past tests. And the main reason why I say that, a lot of people don't realize this, but I'll close here with a diagram. If you think about an essay, like, think about SAT math, okay? And imagine this is the pool of all SAT math questions that the test could possibly draw upon. Any one test, let's say I take practice test 1. Any one test is just a subset of the pool of all SAT math questions. So you could take another SAT math test and say, oh, shoot, that didn't feel like the first one. No, that's true. It might have drawn on a different set. And if you take a third one, you're going to start to see more overlap. And I usually find after 3 tests, that 4th practice test, all of a sudden you're like, oh, now I'm hitting my stride. Yeah, that's because that 4th test now is overlap with things you've seen a lot of. But as you proceed through your prep, don't just review practice test 4 now. Take a quick swing through all past missed questions and make review cumulative. Because if you don't, you're going to repair the recent things and the old things are going to fade away. So whenever I'm teaching, I say this over and over, be cumulative with the review. And if anyone ever just wanted advice on prepping on their own or materials to get, like, I always counsel people over text. Just text me, and we can talk about a study plan, even if you're implementing it on your own. All right. So
Thank you, Jim.
Yes, my pleasure. I did see that the chat had a few more. So I'll toss it back your way, Jen, if you want.
Yeah, I'll read out the questions because
Sure.
that'll make sure everyone can see and hear. But thank you, Jim. That was excellent advice. I love how it was very practical advice for people who are even just preparing on their own. So wonderful.
Absolutely.
Great. So first question we have, is it worthwhile to study off the previous version, like the older version of SAT, in order to prep for the new digital version of SAT? Because they are different, right, Jim?
Yeah. Now I'm gonna answer. My quick answer is yes. Because whenever a test is brand new, there is not a lot of practice material. So you could be studying for the new SAT and easily run out of material. But there's a caveat to the yes. So for reading comprehension, honestly, I think the exams are very different. The old exam has much longer passages with a lot of questions per passage. The new exam is short and choppy. So I don't think the old SAT, in terms of reading, represents the new SAT very well at all. But for writing, grammar, yes, I find grammar questions on the old SAT to be very similar to the grammar test topics tested on the new SAT. And the math. While the math is digital on the new SAT, the curriculum is the same. It used to be that they test geometry, algebra 1, and algebra 2. They're still testing geometry, algebra 1, and algebra 2. So I would say practice, if you're taking the digital SAT, try to primarily use digital SAT practice tests. But again, you're likely to run out. So maybe 25% of the time, intersperse old SAT stuff to kind of make things, to kind of allow you to preserve some of the new practice material. But for the sake of reading comprehension, I don't love using the old SAT.
Great, thank you. Another question. The student has already one SAT done, like already score is out. However, they're considering taking the new one, the digital version, as a comparison. I'm guessing the question is like, already have a score for the old SAT. Should I take another SAT, the digital new version, and then see kind of which one the score is higher?
Okay. Well, that's another depends question. So certainly if my, if the school, let's say that my absolute favorite, like in love with its school, was Marist College. And I'm guessing a little bit, but I don't know. Jen, would you say Marist College, like around a 1300 would be their average SAT score?
Let's take it as an example, right? We don't do hard numbers, but
let's
take it as a hypothetical example.
let's
Yes.
just say that was. Now, if I already had a 1410, like honestly, it's like I'm blowing away their number by so much that like I would say, I don't know, maybe don't even bother with it like at all. And of course, like if I only had a 1210, then the answer is absolutely yes. I think where the question becomes difficult is, well, wait a minute, what if Marist College 1300 is the mean score they accept of accepted students, and I have a 1300? I don't know. I want to increase my acceptance chances. I don't think I would break my neck studying for the digital SAT when I already have a strong score. But would I maybe take one digital SAT practice test to prepare myself and then go in and take an official digital SAT for the sake of even just getting 40 points higher. Yes, I would do that. So it does depend, but I think the amount of energy that you invest in taking the digital SAT when you already have a strong paper SAT score, I think the amount of energy you invest should make sense with your need. So if you want to go to Marist College and you're 100 points behind their average score, I think your need is high. Yeah, maybe you should study hard, invest a lot of time, and go for it. If you already have a score that would look strong for them, I'd say do it, but invest maybe only a little energy into it. And I wouldn't just do it for the heck of it. If you're already like way above what you need and you're just saying, well, I just want to run up the scoreboard, I don't know. I think you should be focusing then more on like, all right, studying for the AP exams or doing other things that would augment your application in other ways.
Yeah, I would agree, Jim. I mean, the question, the practice exam for the digital SAT doesn't sound like it's that long. Is it like an hour? The practice
The
one?
practice for the digital would be like a normal SAT, so 2 hours,
Oh,
50.
2 hours. Okay. So there's
So,
not a
so, I
shorter
mean,
one.
yeah, an easy answer is take a practice test, see how
Yeah,
you
take a
score. If you're
practice
like,
one. I
whoa,
was
I
just gonna
scored
say, it was like, how much do you invest in it? If you just free and you could take a practice one, takes you 2 hours. Hey, you got a score that's like really great, then go take a
and
real
go
one,
for it. And other people, I've had all sorts of results, and I've had people say I scored 150 points lower on the digital SAT than I scored on my paper SAT. And it's not a reason to be upset, but it's just that would make me say, well, wait a minute. Chances are I already have the highest score I'm going to have. Taking the digital SAT doesn't seem like it's going to help. Why throw energy into it? So absolutely, a practice test would help answer.
That would be a good diagnostic. Yeah, but I agree too. Is that like what is your goal, right? What is the college that you're looking at? And again, go back to that common data set, right? Take a look at
Right.
who they're accepting.
Absolutely.
Okay, next one. Okay, so this is kind of like so I guess hypothetical question maybe. So it says, if you took an SAT on paper and submitted it, would it be considered differently than if you submitted a digital SAT because the paper one is not adaptive? But I guess there's no paper one anymore, right? So do you understand the question, Jim?
Yeah. So I think the question is, if
Hmm.
one student submits a paper SAT of 1,200, so then let's say this is student number one, and then student number two applies to the same college and submits a digital 1,200, are they regarded differently? Now, I have to be totally honest because we're all in new territory. I can't say that I know the answer to that question, and it would be something for Google. But I would say just common, like just logical sense and fairness. My bet would be the answer is no. How is it fair to regard them differently? College Board is supposed to be standardizing this such that a paper 1,200 is worth a digital 1,200, and a digital 1,200 is worth a paper 1,200. So if I were the college, in fairness, I would say no, a 1,200 is a 1,200. That's my bet.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. I think it's hard to say like, okay, a paper 1200 is actually a 1250 on digital. There's really no way to compare that. So I would hope, I would
Yeah.
expect that College Board is smart enough to standardize across. So I would not worry about the any difference there, like as a comparison.
Now that brings up another relevant point that I'll just try to do quickly. Super scoring another reason to take the SAT more than once. Super scoring means that if on the December SAT I scored a 510 math and a 630 reading writing, and then I come and take the March SAT and I improve my math a lot, but let's say I just don't quite have as good a day in the reading writing. Super scoring means, and it's a policy that I'd say the majority of colleges do follow. Super scoring means that when you submit both tests, I see everything, but when I compare you to other applicants, I'll look at your best reading writing, I'll look at your best math. I won't involve the fact that they occurred on 2 different dates. I will combine these and I will say this student is a 1230. Now, one big question a lot of students have is, will they superscore a paper SAT with a digital SAT? And that is up to the college. I've been trying to Google this and find the answer to this, and there's nothing definite, but my research has shown that that the answer is leaning yes, that more colleges are going to say, yes, you can super score between paper and digital. Because again, I think it's only fair to juniors who are the kind of first set of people that have to deal with this transition. So anyway, it just kind of made me think of that. This is another reason to take the test more than once. It may be a reason to make a student who has a paper score try the digital SAT, because if they can score higher in even just one section or the other, it raises the super score.
That's a great point. That's actually the next question
Oh,
was what was college's opinion on super scoring? Is it recommended? But I think it's not really an option for us, like as applicants. It's more the college's policy. So
100%.
I would say, as applicants, if you have 2 scores or 3 scores, submit those scores, like assuming that the college is going to super score, then definitely send those and then assume that they are going to take the highest scores. So I wouldn't hold back on scores. And, for example, if you had one bad day on one of the reading and, they're going to see this terrible score, but you had a really great math score or vice versa, don't hold back those scores, because most colleges are super scoring, and you can find that out at their website. They're usually very clear on whether they are super scoring or not. Of course, you can also contact me if you have questions about, hey, I don't know if this college is super scoring or not. You can ask me, or you can actually just call or email the college directly and they will tell you.
And I've noticed you can just, for example, you can Google Skidmore College super score, and the first hit on
Exactly.
Google will usually be very reliable.
Yes, they're very, very clear about it usually. But I would agree with you, Jim. Most colleges are super scoring. So again, that's an excellent reason to take it at least twice.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that question was posed, because it's certainly very relevant.
Yeah. Okay, last question on the chat. Any recommended websites for self-preparation for practice, SAT or ACT? I know you mentioned a couple of books, Jim, but any websites you would recommend?
So, so the favorite across the board is khanacademy.org. They have a ton, they have a lot of materials. They work in concert with College Board, the test makers. So any practice test that College Board release, Khan Academy has. They have a ton of videos, and sometimes video is the best way to learn a concept. So that's definitely a big favorite. Only, I'll remind you of my website, but I'm not as fancy with videos and so forth, but I will post as many practice tests as I can possibly find for SAT and ACT, I post on my site. So just for a sheer number of practice tests. And then I'm just trying to think to be totally honest, I don't have another one that's near as like popular and strong as Khan Academy. But if I were to say, well, where do I hear about second most besides Khan Academy? And it does get some like kind of mixed reviews. Some people say, oh, they had a great new takes on things, and some people are like, but Magoosh, which I believe does SAT and ACT, you'd have to check, is another good website for like educational materials. But if you haven't done Khan Academy yet, that would definitely be the place to start.
Awesome. Thank you, Jim. I think that's all the questions in the chat. It is 5:19. We went a little over, which is fine. We're happy to answer your questions. We'll just kind of do last call for questions before we end here. We do have the recording, so I will send everybody the link. And then, yeah, so any questions, people can unmute or you can type your question in the chat. Otherwise, thank you so much for being with us today.
Okay, and I want to say a big thank you as well, and thank you everybody for joining us. Jen, you were the kind of backbone in organizing this, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate everything you do afterwards, sending people. Jen's always great with kind of sending the recording and any important links. Please feel free to contact either of us with more questions.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Have a good evening. Hope you guys enjoyed the session. Like Jim said, feel free to contact either one of us if you have any questions or just need help in the future. Well, good luck to everyone, and I will see you soon.